Welcome to episode 4 of the History Echoes podcast. I'm Mick Gzowski. This is Mark Bourrie. Today we are about a week past the election.
It feels like a year, but I think so. Yeah.
Well, let's
Yes,
start.
it is
Let's
a
start.
week.
Let's start. What were your thoughts on the recent federal election?
It does seem like a year ago, doesn't it? It just seems like a whole other time. It was really surprising in a lot of ways. I was surprised that the turnout wasn't so high in the final vote when it was so high in the advance poll, and I don't know what to make of that. But I mean, just getting away from the small stuff.
Interesting, like we don't know the totals. Like, was it an average turnout just
I
with
think
a
it
heavy
was.
front load? Or?
Yeah, I think it was, and I'm not sure why. And I was really curious on election day itself about whether who was voting in the advance poll, and I still am. But it doesn't matter. I mean, the votes are counted pretty much, and there's still some seats that are up in the air, but we're going to recount. But the conventional wisdom, which has been wrong for a year or so anyway, or at least it just hasn't panned out, was that Carney was going to win a majority, and he didn't. And
Came awfully close.
He came awfully close, and I think he'll be fine in terms of not having to really crawl to get enough support to keep going. I could see this government lasting as long as the last one did, especially if everybody in our parliament is kind of set on the idea of getting past Trump, getting past at least the main part of Trump before they go into another election and not have another Trump election. I don't think any conservative would want that, or any liberal would want that. And probably nobody in the NDP.
So when are the midterms? 2028?
Yeah, they're next year, the 2026. So you'll start to see the primaries for those will start in early next year, and they'll be lining up, sort of getting into line for these primaries and the general, even late this year. The House of Representatives, for people who aren't up on this arcane stuff, all of them come up for re-election in 2026. The entire House. They only have a 2-year term, which is amazing. And a third of the Senate comes up for re-election. So they'll be looking at their own situations, the Congress people and the senators, and looking at Trump and saying,
Your approval numbers are quite low.
Yes, but can Trump put a primary hex on me or not? If you're a Republican, can he prevent me from getting the nomination and then having me in the general? And the Democrats will have to take a look and see how they are handling Trump, because they'll be facing challenges from people who think that Schumer is writing a letter with 6 important points to Trump isn't enough of a pushback.
Should have been 7 points at least.
Should have been 7 points at least. And there's a lot of mockery going on in the American media about how lame the Democrats are. So our people are just going to have to sit on the sidelines of this and deal with whatever Trump sends our way until there's a clearer picture. And then after the midterms, Trump himself becomes lame duck.
Well, if you're predicting some sort of reckoning for the conservatives until the midterms in the United States, it appears that Andrew Scheer has not got the message. He's come out and tried to say what a great win we almost had.
Oh, well, they did have almost a great win. I mean, they got incredibly good voting numbers. They just didn't have any luck about.
Well, they got great numbers, but the Liberals got better.
Yeah, well, the Liberals.
This is the same thing that Trump points out.
Well,
right?
yeah,
we
but
got a lot of votes, but we didn't.
There were things in that election, if I was a conservative strategist, I would be very happy about. They won every seat in Ontario where cars are built. They finished off generations of Liberal and NDP presence in southwestern Ontario. It no longer exists. The
death knell has been rung many times for political parties.
Many times, and these folks could come back. But if you look at the Windsor area that produced Herb Gray and Paul Martin and
Senior
Eugene Whalen and Shaughnessy Cohen, that's all conservative now. The last non-conservative seat was an NDP seat, and they lost it in this election. London area, I think maybe there's still a Liberal seat, but the area that region was Liberal owned 50 years ago. That was provincially and federally. The Tories made inroads into the 905. They held the seats in rural Ontario. They 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 had a very good election in a lot of ways. They didn't. The Liberals had every conceivable piece of luck.
Interesting. We started this talking about turnout because one of the highest turnouts in the country was in Poilievre's riding.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that was a great race. But I was going to finish by saying that that the Liberals had every conceivable piece of luck, almost. I mean, except for the fact that they were running for the fourth time. They had a new leader. Canadians, tend to hate their political leaders, and every leader since every prime minister since Pearson's left in a hail of bullets. So they had nothing against Carney. So that was good luck for them. They had the whole Trump thing. They had Poilievre, for whatever.
You mean his personal dislikability?
Yeah. And his lousy campaign.
What did Bob Fife call him? A dick?
Yeah. They had the NDP collapsing. They had the Bloc losing votes, bleeding votes in Quebec. They had everything you could possibly think of in Canada, in Canadian politics going for them. They still couldn't win a majority. So you got to wonder what it would take for them to win a majority again.
There's voter fatigue. The Liberal brand was very tired this time around, and the Conservatives rightly targeted the fact that the cabinet is not very different.
Yeah, and they're going to the next election. They're going to be running for 5 in a row, and there's only been once in Canadian history where a party's won 5 in a row, and it was Mackenzie King, Louis Saint Laurent, through the Depression, the war, and the immediate post-war prosperity, and hardly have a situation like that. It's very, very hard to win 4 in a row. 5 in a row, like I said, it's only been done once. Sir John A. Macdonald couldn't do it. Interesting
you brought up Mackenzie King, because Mackenzie King had the same situation that Mark Carney has with Poilievre with Arthur Meehan. When Arthur Meehan lost his seat in an election, and King actually agreed to not run a candidate against him.
He gave up his Senate seat in 1942. Yeah, and they didn't run anybody against him, so everybody voted NDP, and they still put Meehan out to pasture. But another thing, too, is that King also lost his seat twice when he was prime minister. He lost it in 25, and he lost it in 45. And they had to find him a seat both times. Party came back with a win, but they had to find him seats. King was terrible at winning seats. His personal electoral record was nowhere near as good as his leadership electoral record. So these things happen.
Why? Why is that?
Partly he would represent ridings way out west.
Because he was gay?
No, because he never visited his ridings, because he was not exactly a constituency MP.
And we don't know that he was actually gay. We just know
that you're the one saying
he was never
gay.
Married.
The only
no, that's why I'm correcting.
The only man love I've ever seen in his life was for this fellow Harper, not Stephen, the one that they have the statue for the Sir Galahad in front of the Parliament building.
Right.
He was madly enamored with that man,
and the dog that he kept renaming.
Pat. Yeah, Pat the dog.
There were several Pats, right?
Pat 1, Pat 2, Pat 3, yeah. They're all the same kind of dog. They all look the same. I kind of understand it, especially if you believe in reincarnation. You just go around looking for the Dalai Lama dog. But King's sex life, such as it was, is probably beyond our capabilities of understanding.
If only we had a crystal ball.
If only. Yep. There's some great stories about that ball, but
well, there's a story that I told in Canadian History magazine of Speaker Greg Fergus when he took possession of the farm, which is the perk that the speakers get. One of the first things he did was he saw Mackenzie King's crystal ball, and he had to have it removed because he was worried about his 5 and 6 year old grandsons running around, and Fergus said, "Oh my God, and I will not be the man responsible for smashing this historical heirloom." So the NCC has it and has put it in safekeeping.
Well, there's two. There's one that Fergus has or had,
and the one in Laurier House.
The one in Laurier House, and the one in Laurier House, to go off on another Bourrie tangent, was the story behind that was that's a real crystal ball. That's made. It's not made of glass. It's made of quartz crystal. And those are very expensive. And King was in an antique shop in London and saw this thing. And the King was very cheap and not above basically begging people for things. All of Laurier House is filled with pilfered stuff. If you go through it and actually get the story behind each piece, it's all scams and swag. But he sees this thing, and it is crazy expensive. I don't know what they'd be worth in today's dollars. Let's maybe say 10,000. And a woman comes in who he knows she's rich, and he starts to boo-hoo her about this thing and how he'd love to have it. And he just can't afford it, and she bought it for him, and that's how he got it. He didn't pay for it himself. It didn't come through some weird witchy thing. It was him basically freeloading.
Did you have to declare gifts of a certain value in those days?
You get the house for free.
Laurier House was the party gave him that.
No,
right?
well, no, Mrs. Laurier.
Mrs. Laurier gave it right to him.
Yep.
But for the people of Canada, though, right?
Well, sort of. Yeah. It was kind of iffy about whether he would pass it on to the next leader or not. So he got the house. He got most of his libraries pilfered. There's a cigarette case in there set in diamonds that he pilfered from the royal family. It was sent over as a gift.
Well, Laurier House has his little collection of his mother's hair.
Yeah, the hair. There's a
little shrine to her, right?
Yeah, and there's a piece of like a bench from Westminster Abbey. He went in there and they're doing some work on the place, and he got that. There's all kinds of other like pieces.
He made Lester Pearson his go get the broken frontals of like all of his sculpture garden with Lester Pearson being when he was foreign affairs
for any of that.
Yeah, during the Second World War.
Even
a bank blew up. Go and get me the facade.
And sometimes around Ottawa, these guys would be working and tearing down, all the beautiful things that they did tear down in Ottawa. And he'd be going by in the limo, and he'd stop and he'd say, "Well, what are you gonna do with this stuff?" And they'd say, like, maybe take it to Tepperman's, maybe to the dump. And he'd say, "Oh, well, and send a public works truck around, and they'd pick it up and take it up to Kingsmere." I don't think that man paid for much of it. I mean,
the local stuff is quite noble, but I understand that Pearson really did not like going to bombed out buildings and saying, "Can I have that bit?"
Yeah, I can understand why. And there's all kinds of like pieces in there that are really weathered. You can tell they're ancient. Like these are, gargoyles and things from buildings that were hundreds of years old. And he, stuff that he got from those, and even things in the little glass cases. There's little Roman bottles and things that he got John D. Rockefeller Jr. to buy him. There's some sort of chair that belonged to Mary Queen of Scots that he scored somehow in that house, and lots and lots of sort of souvenir-y things. I mean, these days it's golf balls with the presidential seal, but back then it was like serious swag. One of the people I was talking to last week when I was helping my daughter was telling me about going to the White House back in the 9/11 days and seeing the M&M packages that they had, the free M&Ms with the presidential seal.
My friend Dave Chan has a collection of those. He's a hill photographer, well-known photojournalist. Yes, I think he has about 5 or 6 presidents in M&M packages.
Yeah, and
you get them free on the plane, right?
Yeah, and in the White House too, apparently. And then when I first started at Ottawa, you would go to a garden party at 24 Sussex, and there were these bowls with books and matches.
The matches,
right?
I have a pair of those.
24 Sussex and gilt on them, and you see some of the most famous journalists in Canada stuffing their pockets with these things. But even more pathetic were the people who were actually taking the napkins with the gold embossed 24 Sussex. Now that was a really lame.
No. What was really pathetic was the drunken journalists who were allowed to drive home as they left those parties.
Oh yeah, right past the Mounties and stuff. Yeah, that too, I suppose. But I mean, just in terms of, it's pretty low rent.
Okay, but let's circle back to Poilievre. We've gone a whole way around. Now, Poilievre is the official leader of the opposition without a seat, or is he no longer?
That's a really tricky one because in our system, the official leader of the opposition is a parliamentary thing, right? It's not a job. You don't get sworn into it. The Governor General doesn't swear you in like she does with the Prime Minister or the Cabinet. So it's kind of a thing that the House decides on in a lot of ways. And on the rules, whatever the rules are for that, and the traditions and the
I've seen tweets that are saying that
there's
because he's not an MP, he cannot be the OLO.
Well, that's kind of tricky. You could be the party leader, Jagmeet Singh was party leader of the NDP for ages and hung around in the visitors gallery and did his scrums in the foyer. I don't think this is going to be a problem because I think that they'll have a by-election this summer and he'll be ready for the fall term. They're going to have a spring term just because they have a bunch of spending that they have to pass. I mean, they've been spending using basically the government checkbook through something called warrants, and they have to to sort of legal up the spending. And then
I think the spring setting's only 2 weeks.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Sitting.
So he misses 2 weeks. He shows up and he scrums in the foyer and stuff. If and then goes out to Calgary, and runs in a by-election in a riding where the Tories got 80% of the vote. Looks like he'll run against a People's Party of Canada person.
Yeah, isn't Max going to run himself?
Maybe. They got 2% of the vote in that riding.
Oh, my. That's high for them, isn't it?
Yeah, it was high in this election. That's one of the things, too, that people haven't talked about is the NDP vote collapsed, so did the PPC vote.
Yes.
Which is one of the reasons, actually.
The Bloc didn't do too well either.
The Bloc didn't do too well, but they didn't do as badly as people thought. And the Tories neither broke through nor lost in Quebec. Had they done either thing, it would be somebody's majority, right? So yeah, I think Poilievre is going to be mildly displaced. I think that
still living in Stornoway
seems to be, and I think that we've seen a sort of graciousness with Carney. In terms of the by-election itself, where he says he'll call a quick by-election.
No games, he said.
No games. So, this is a family living in this house with an autistic child. And, do you turn them out and then, for 3 months and then let them back in or whatever? There's a lot of...
There is a staff.
There is a staff. Oh, yeah. It's a nice gig, but, there's a lot of vindictiveness among Liberals towards Poilievre, and rightly so in some ways, because he's goaded them for years and years. And when they say, well, what would he do in that situation? I wouldn't say the graciousness would come into it, and this is the sort of bad political moves.
Well, that's why I wondered, what's Carney's motivation to be the good guy? Is he thinking future election?
Be not the asshole.
Yeah.
The asshole is Poilievre. Right? If you're doing the casting, you don't want two assholes. You don't want one, and it's going to be the other guy. So what's it cost him? Nothing. Poilievre's going to be back. You can have a by-election now. You can have one in 100.
Well, no, so the MP,
160 days.
The MP has to serve 30 days before resigning, right? Isn't there some rule? I'm not sure. I thought I remember that you could announce that you were going to resign, but you actually had to sit for 30 days to have your election validated.
Well, yeah, I guess. I mean, one of the things too is that,
and then a short campaign is 38, right?
That all these people who are new MPs, they haven't been sworn in.
Right.
They haven't signed the book. So maybe it does take about 30 days for the results to be certified, sent back to the chief electoral officer, and made official. I suppose they're gazetted in the Canada Gazette. A lot of this stuff is super arcane to people, but I'm just saying there's a procedure that takes time. So maybe 30 days would do it, and then.
I saw that the longest ballot guys have promised 200 names on Poilievre's next riding.
I'm not sure what that did.
Annoyed people.
It annoyed people, but
I do know that
one
of the
stop
things
them from voting.
No, but it meant that I guess they had to have a lot of extra ballot boxes because in the Poilievre's riding, I heard from an anecdotal story from somebody who was there that they could only fit about 10 ballots per box because they were so dumb and long.
It's more of a pain in the ass for Elections Canada than anybody. Because they've got to count each ballot, and they've got to check to make sure that you didn't vote twice or anything.
Yeah.
The really dirty thing to do is run 6 guys named Pierre Poilievre, which the Tories did to Max Bernier once.
They did, didn't they?
They did. They want another guy, not 6 guys.
But people actually whose name was Max Bernier.
Yeah,
I did Google Poilievre in 411 Canada, and there are other Poilievres. I didn't see
not too many.
Pierre, but
there's lots of Berniers in Quebec and lots of guys named Max or Maxime. But even so, that was hardly a coincidence. But I don't see how the long ballot thing would change the results out there at all. I think.
So you think the Liberals will not run anybody at all? They'll do the old convention.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah,
Tories won 80% of the vote in that riding last time. This is not a riding that's like that's like Carleton. Out there, in that riding, they would probably want him to be reelected. It's his stomping grounds, and yeah, if he loses that, he's totally finished because he just obviously can't win anywhere. But if he can't win a Calgary seat like that, you're done.
Is he obligated to buy property in the riding?
No, only if he's a senator.
So if he wins, he can keep his house in Ottawa and keep living in Stornoway and have no pied-à-terre in the riding at all.
Well, I don't think he needs to have a pied-à-terre, but he might want one. He might want to do a little more riding outreach than he did in Carleton the last few years. But his mom is there too, right?
In the riding?
Well, she's in Calgary.
Right.
But lots of people run in ridings where they don't live. It happens all the time. Lester Pearson represented the riding of Algoma, for God's sake. I mean, he never lived in Sault Ste. Marie. But Brian Mulroney was MP for Central Nova.
That's right, yeah. And lived in Westmount.
For a couple of years, yeah. Actually, he lived in Stornoway because he was leader of the opposition. That's Peter MacKay's father, Elmer, gave up that seat in 83, I guess it was. Maybe 82, 83, I'm pretty sure. For Mulroney to run, he'd been chosen as conservative leader, progressive conservative leader. MacKay gave up the seat. Mulroney easily won it, served out that term, and then won in 84, representing the Baie-Comeau area. I forget what that riding was called. Maybe it was called Baie-Comeau. And MacKay was paid. Well, I wouldn't say paid off, but when they won, and MacKay went back into his seat and won, he got a good cabinet job. And that's probably what will happen to Buddy here.
I was wondering, what do you think the payoff was?
It'll be a cabinet seat or something.
Even if he's not in government?
Well, well, give a cabinet seat if he's not in government. And the guy's bet is that he'll win the next election, which is not an unreasonable bet.
Right, because he's something like 6 months short of his pension.
Yeah, so he's going to have to run again, no matter what he does, and he'll run again.
And the party,
Poilievre's not going to run.
The party's allowed to put him on salary for some sort of cushy.
Yeah, make
stipend.
him a staffer.
Yeah.
So he
because he must have dropped tens of thousands of his own dollars running that election.
Yeah, but he'll own that seat for the rest of his life too, as long as he's and he'll max out his pension and he'll be fine.
Yeah.
It's not like he took any risk of of losing. It's not like he won the seat by 3% or something like that.
I mentioned earlier that Andrew Scheer being quite aggressive on media interviews in the last couple of days, setting a tone that is unchanged from the previous Poilievre opposition. Do you expect any difference, any humility or learning from this election, or you think it's same old, same old?
Oh, God. As a father and a husband, I hope there's a self-reflection. This is a young man. From what I know of him, writing the book about him, I don't think he's ever been put in a position where he's had to do a lot of self-reflection. I'm not sure that that's part of his makeup. And it was certainly that he wasn't able to reflect during the campaign itself because they just wandered off on a tangent when the rest of the country was going one way. Jenny Byrne and Pierre Poilievre went off on another. He'll certainly look at his team, and of course, what happens to Jenny Byrne and how much she's made to wear the loss will be really interesting. And his real the real crisis of his life that's coming up is how to keep that party together. I think his leadership is okay for now, till they have the leadership review next March or February, March. I don't think they're going to stab him in the back in caucus. They would have, if they were going to do that. I doubt he would have found a seat to run in. I think that was the way to get rid of him. If the caucus really wanted to get rid of him, was to talk to the guy who was willing to give up a seat, or just make sure that didn't happen. But he's got to rebuild with the Ford people, and answer the question, like, why didn't you call Doug Ford ever? And why?
And the Premier of Nova Scotia.
And Houston, the Premier of Nova Scotia. These are the people that sat on their hands and cost him seats that he needed to win. Or if it had gone really bad,
Ford said during the campaign that he was still angry that Poilievre had refused letting any of his staff work on Ford's campaign.
Yeah. Well, why wouldn't you be?
Yeah.
You know, a lot of them are the same people. Don't forget.
Yeah.
It's not like there's two sets of staff.
Well, Jenny Byrne worked for Ford at one point.
Yeah, but then she got fired. I mean, that's what Corey Tedeschi says anyway.
Yeah.
But, you know, say you're a Tory and you're in Toronto, which, you know, probably will happen to you someday, and you work for Doug Ford, or you work for Poilievre and help get him in. And then Doug Ford, you're a member of the party, which means you're a member of the provincial party, and they call you up and they say, Mick, you want to put up some signs and knock on doors? And you go, oh, I can. They told me, you know, Ottawa told me not to. It's not an insane question to ask, like, why did they do that, Mick? And you remember who brung you, you know?
Yeah.
And it's not just the Conservatives, the Liberals would be the same way. Everybody.
Though I know from experience, lots of Liberals go provincial and federal seamlessly.
Yeah, and some don't, but they make their own choice.
They make their own choice, but they're not chastised for doing it.
No, but when the leader tells you, if Mark Carney or
that was so bizarre about it.
or whatever said you can't do it,
that was a dictum from the top, and it was a really interesting choice. It was just vindictiveness.
Well, it was a stupid choice. It was like absolutely no sweat off their butt to say, well, do what you like.
Yeah,
like what did it cost them? You know, they weren't running, and they weren't even getting ready. They weren't setting up nomination meetings. That was one of the things they got behind on. Tories have been pushing for an election for months. Oh, we're going to get the House back and have an election. And then the election's called, and everyone sees it coming at that point, and they're still doing nomination meetings right up until the end of the nomination period, which is crazy when you get and then you take a look at Carleton, where Bruce Fanjoy is running against Poilievre,
ran out knocking
on doors for like a year and a half.
2 years. 2 years.
2 years. Yeah. To get the nomination.
6 months before the nomination, he spent 6 months without the nomination.
Yeah, he did. And then he knocked on doors for like a year and a half. And you know,
and won decisively.
And another thing too is that's how Poilievre won the riding in 2004. So why is this lost on these people? That like why do they have these double standards of, well, I won by knocking on doors, but I don't need the guy in Simcoe East or whatever to knock on doors. We'll just nominate this guy 4 weeks before the vote, and you know, hopefully everybody will know him. Well, why in the world would that work? And a lot of it had to do with their the absolute control freak system they had. Just like we finished, okay? Yeah. The absolute control freak thing that they had, where like local people who say, like the mayor of Nowhere, Ontario, wants to run in Simcoe East, which is not really riding, by the way, and he's been in a party for years and years and years, and can't run because he hasn't been approved by Ottawa. You know, people who don't even know him are going to decide whether he gets to run in a place where he's been a volunteer and been given the money for years and years and years. And then Jenny Byrne or Pierre Poilievre or somebody else is going to decide. So, like, why would you even want to play that game? And they had people who were seemingly all right, who were nominated.
Isn't that what reform was just founded on?
Yeah, exactly. The idea of grassroots, that the local constituency association would say, well, Mick Gzowski, he's a great guy. He's the best guy we know for Ottawa, and that should be good, unless they run a CPIC thing on the police check on him and find about the truth about the party, the event. Why not let them run, or the bankruptcy or whatever? Like, if the person's clean, then why in the world are they vetting?
It was a party. It wasn't a bankruptcy.
Yeah. Like, why do they keep doing this to people? And, I've seen this with Liberals too. And, where people where they've made real enemies of extremely spiteful people by choosing from Ottawa rather than let the locals decide and let the voters decide a riding. I think of people like Warren Kinsella.
Well, it's the consolidation of power in the PMO that seems to also happen in the OL, though.
It happens everywhere, and it's got to stop. This is lethal to political parties, because all you're getting now are fundraising by lobbyists to pay lobbyists to run campaigns, and you get the very low quality local candidates. Partly because what's the job? You come to Ottawa and you're become a PR agent for for a prime minister's office or an opposition leader's office.
What do you think? How do you think Carney's going to do in the consolidation of power? I mean, he seems like a fairly driven, idealistic person.
Yeah, and I don't think grassroots.
You don't love him. I'm getting the impression.
I don't think grassroots democracy is. I think he's a snob, and I say that as somebody who doesn't throw that word around much. But in my own dealings with him, it was most unpleasant. There's a real arrogance of somebody who did the top tier university and top tier job thing, and doesn't really understand how politics works as opposed to administration. I think he's probably going to be a fantastic administrator in some ways, but the minefields are not administrative; they're political. And he has a tin ear for politics. And one of the real lucky things about the Liberals is that people don't know anything about the guy. And a conservative writer, Ken White, wrote a Substack saying that what was really missing from this campaign was a really good description feature about who the hell this man is, other than the resume. And you hear the odd word like prickly and arrogant and things like that from former staffers, and if you listen closely enough, you don't hear people say, "Oh, this guy was a delight to work with." He when my mom died, he bought me flowers or whatever. You don't hear that kind of stuff where you think, "Oh, this guy's able to build bridges." And I don't think he's going to choose strong ministers.
You wouldn't say the same thing about Poilievre, but I've heard stories about him making those phone calls.
Yeah, I've heard two sets of stories. One is that actually working in the office with him was like working with a cornered Wolverine, but then he's also good at doing these outreach calls. Now, the best person for that was Brian Mulroney. Brian Mulroney would work the phones for a couple of hours, calling like editors of
even after he left office.
Yeah, he never stopped. It was part of his makeup was to do this. Yeah. And he would call editors of papers, big and small. He'd call mayors. He'd call,
unlike Trump, who pretends to be somebody else reviewing him.
Yeah. He just like and he seemed to enjoy it. And he you get a call from the prime minister. That's a big deal for a lot of people.
Sure,
but your minister, if you're the mayor of Barrie, have
you ever had a call from a prime minister?
No,
I worked for Martin, never called me.
Nope.
I'd be thrilled. I would be thrilled. I
sent Justin Trudeau a book that I wrote. I sent him two. I sent him a copy of Bushrunner, my Radisson book, as a thank you for speaking to my friend's law class when they were graduating. And he got it, obviously, and they had a good press secretary at that point. This is during COVID, so he spoke. He did like
didn't it make its way onto his bookshelf?
Yes, it did, causing my mother to vapor lock because she was a conservative, but she was very proud that her son's book was there, so it wasn't computing. She wasn't a Trudeau fan at all. So then, when my next book came out, I sent him a copy of that. And a copy of the autobiography that John Kay wrote about him, and asked him to sign the autobiography and send it back and keep the other one that of my book. And I got nothing back. And then I sent something to the media office when I was doing this book, saying I'm doing this book. Could you please at least acknowledge the email? Because I want to speak to the prime minister about what it's like to run against Pierre Poilievre. And now it can be told. And I said, and I don't have like a personal email for a top banana, but just let me know that you got this email. And I didn't even get that.
No.
And it makes me realize just how poor communication can be, and how sort of almost classist it's this politics.
The only excuse I could make was I remember when I was in the PMO and I was a lowly nothing. My inbox was inundated.
But when the inbox is media inquiries at pmo.gc.ca,
yeah, right, and you have a media desk that's job is to respond to these things.
Yeah, and there was a time when even if you write a letter to the King, King of Canada, of England, whatever, and dear King, like I'm really concerned about blah blah blah, you will get a letter back saying, "Dear Dear Count Gzowski, I am the private secretary to the king. The king has been informed of your letter and expresses his concern. Signed, Sir Basil Blather."
I haven't done that, but I have done. You can get for special numerical anniversaries.
Oh yeah,
letters from the Queen, the Governor General.
and they're for real.
I've done it for several people now, and it's
Yeah.
to listeners who may hear this. Make sure you give them lead time to give you the advance so that they can do it. But you can get it's wonderful. Like especially my mother hates Doug Ford and loved getting an email from Doug Ford wishing her a happy birthday because she hated him so
How
much.
old was she?
That was for 80.
Okay, my mom's going to be 92, so I got to do something.
You need big numbers, but anything after 9, you
when
can
she
go
hits-
every year.
I think when you hit 100, it's you get the grand slam. You get
Exactly.
get the king.
You get the king.
And she'll make it. So I'm looking forward to that. I don't know what she thinks of King Charles, but yeah, exactly. People are delighted to get that stuff.
You mentioned your book, and I wanted something. You said something on Facebook today on the social media, which I found fascinating. Which there was an advertisement for Mark Carney AI written book. Were you kidding? Is there actually a book written by AI?
Yes,
and it's beating you on the bestsellers currently.
It's the AI book about his wife is supposedly beating me on the Amazon list. I heard
Somebody pressed a button and said, "Write a book about his wife," and it spat it out, and they printed it, and it's for sale.
There's about 30 AI books about Carney apparently now.
Oh my God!
And a bazillion about Trump. Can you imagine? And the one on Amazon, which I really, really advise people to look at, or anybody who follows me on Facebook, I have it posted there. They have the Canadian flag on the cover upside down, and they have a picture of like just this much of a man's face, and the rest of it is like on the edge of the thing and it's not Carney probably. They just found some
Russian guy,
some middle-aged white dude, and cropped it up to the point where the intellectual property is not an issue, and this whole book is AI, and the one so when I looked this morning, and I do check every day. Stephen Bowen's book on the Hudson Bay Company was #1 in Canadian biographies, and the #2 book was an AI book about Diana Carney, and my book on Poilievre was #3. So an AI book was ahead of mine. Of course, you can buy my book everywhere else too. But
who gets the authorship on the AI book?
Whoever generated the AI. So this is something like, if I was to self-publish on Amazon, I would give them the manuscript and all formatted and everything, because the AI generates the copy. But you lay out the book, you get AI to do a cover, and it ends up with this like goat head soup that they had, and it's either like a Kindle book or print on demand, and these things are just ground out. I've seen AI on me. And mostly it's rewriting a Wikipedia page, because there's a Wikipedia page about me and little bits and pieces. I guess the stuff just goes much, much farther into the universe of the internet. And then from what I saw in the Carney book, it looked like they were actually AIing a lot of Carney's own book. Right, because a lot of it is sort of autobiographical. At least it's I think this, I think that. So the
misinformation stuff coming out, where there's a meme that's going around that is a criticism of Carney's book that people are posting as a meme, saying, "Look, this is what Carney wrote," and it's not. It's a review of Carney's book, and they're claiming that it was Carney.
Oh yeah, well, there's so much stupid in the world right now. It's boggling.
The author of that AI book reminded me of a tradition in film. If you ever see the name Alan Smithee on a film,
oh yeah,
the history of that is it was a director who decided the cinema had, or the studio had ruined his vision so much he wanted his name taken off the project, and they said no, there has to be a name there. And so Alan Smithee. And so if you ever see Alan Smithee on a film anywhere, it's somebody that's hated the film and wanted their name removed. And so this is the placeholder.
That's very cool. Yeah, with that particular book, I looked at you could click the author's name, and I did, and there were several books about Brazil written by this author, Amazon says they're going to get rid of this stuff or crack down, but they say lots of things and they never do.
So how do you think this thing comes to exist? Is there some programmer in an office who just says
Somewhere.
this is,
Yeah, in the world, in China maybe, or who knows where. Somebody who speaks English says whatever the equivalent to some big AI program. I want a book.
Did you read any reviews of the AI book?
No.
AI written reviews of the
AI
really written book.
Yeah, AI accounts. I saw that there were the reviews. A right-wing site, Small Dead Animals, posted a link to this book, to the Diana book, and Diana Carney book, and then the weasels from that site gave it 0. There's just this whole list of Amazon reviews of 0 on that book. So, which is probably Amazon should not let people put reviews of books that they haven't bought, but on Amazon or haven't bought anywhere else, as far as Amazon knows. But there's one on Amazon about this book saying that I think we talked about this, about how I have it in my chicken coop holding up a table, 0 out of 5, and I'm like, well, I had chickens. It must be a pretty fancy coop because I don't remember my chickens having a table, but maybe that was AI too. Who knows?
To hold their fingers up while they drink tea.
Yes. So you got to keep it very level.
The sort of unfinished nature of what's happened in this election, with Poilievre being a continuing story till he gets another one and getting another kick at the can, must actually have made you, of all people, happy. This must be good for book sales to keep interest in him. Like if he was toast, if he was done, that'd be the end of book sales for you, probably.
Yeah,
right?
and on the way over, I was thinking about like how much I want to talk about this. I have such mixed feelings where I think it would have been a very bad idea for this man to be Prime Minister of Canada at this time of his life. He may grow into it. He's only like 45, 46 years old. We all grow and change. I'm a better person, I hope, than I was when I was 45. But that aside,
he hasn't said anything insulting about First Nations people in about 20 years.
Yeah, whatever. Which is
Tar Baby. That was years ago too.
So like, kind of like, well, it'd be nice if he stuck around and helped me sell some more books. I could update it for the next election, and we could do it again, and we could have it out, way before the election, instead of like, colliding with an early election. Your book, you got it out for the election. No, the election was supposed to be in the fall. We had like 5 good weeks to sell this book, and we sold a ton of them in 5 weeks. And it was like number 2 on the bestseller list for 3 of the 5, and was very respectable for the other 2.
Congratulations.
Oh, thank you. But I would love to update this for the next election and put it out. But so part of me says, well, I'm lazy and I'd much rather update a book than write another book. And I don't want to write another Canadian political book. I'm actually backing away very slowly from writing any. I hadn't written anything political in years, and I wasn't inclined to get into that again. But it would be nice if this book was still alive. I think it's an intriguing story, and there's a lot of things in here about Canadian politics that fit no matter who the leader is, and explain like what some of the systemic problems are in Canadian politics that I don't think Mark Carney's going to fix. I don't think Poilievre's going to fix, or the next leader of the Conservatives is going to fix it. In the NDP, if they ever were contenders, I think they would probably fall into the same problems, and a lot of it has to do with just basically trusting Canadians to do good politics, and trusting people regionally and at the grassroots level, sharing power with them, so that we don't have power concentrated among a dozen people in Ottawa.
The biggest criticism I would label against the Poilievre Conservatives was their what was called the torture room philosophy they had for committees, where committees are the place where government actually does the real work.
That's the last place where a legislative system works. Yeah.
And it didn't under them. Like, I mean, they deliberately stacked witnesses to be flamboyant for them, and they structured all of their performances to be social media pithy clips.
Yep.
And not a lot got done.
Yeah, and so that
And
basically,
I don't see that changing. Like from so far, I so far with having Scheer step in as the interim. I mean, he's the House leader, so he's not the interim leader, but he's been the face so far this week, and as aggressive as anything Poilievre ever did.
I think what the Liberals and whoever they get to support them, whether it's a handful of NDP people or whatever, need to tighten up the rules of these committees and change up the system to make these committees much more serious.
Can you do that?
Oh yeah, for sure. Of course they can.
That'd be good.
These are House rules, and they're not constitutional rules. They're not. They would have to get enough support in each committee.
I would say we could do a whole episode on committees. Let's do that in the future.
Yeah, we should, because another thing that they need is they need full-time legislative counsel for each one of them. So they need full-time researchers on each one of them, who are like Library of Parliament people who are apolitical. And if they do that have a system like the American committees in Congress, I think they would be really well on their way to fixing the problems. But in the House itself, the House has become so irrelevant. Like, nobody debates legislation. Nobody even reads the stuff. A lot of the legislation really isn't read until it gets to committee or until it gets even to the Senate. And this has been going on way, way before anybody who's here now was around. Like when I started 30 years ago, I was seeing, Senator Doyle, who had been editor of the Globe and Mail, and Senator Baudouin, who was the dean of the French civil law section at U of O, going through bills and realizing that they hadn't been read, that they just didn't make sense. And this is in the Senate, and sending them back. And if your job as an MP, then you should be reading the laws that you pass. That just seems like such a basic thing, and you should show up.
There ought to be a law.
Yeah, and when if you know MPs or you hang around the Hill, you hear them griping about House duty. This is where they have to go in and while bills are being debated. Well, you'd think that if I was running for Parliament, to me that's the job. That's the up here, and then all the PR stuff is farther down. But that's not. It's totally bass backwards up here, and the democracy is a really, really thin thing, easily broken and hard to fix. And until we get a prime minister who's willing, to work to fix it, and political parties that are willing to work to fix them, we're just going to have this constant wave of anger from the regions because they're not heard. They don't have a big minister. They don't have a Mazinkowski at the table anymore. They don't have, a guy like MacDonald, not Sir John A., but from Nova Scotia was their minister during the war. They don't have, a Eugene Whalen from Southwestern Ontario with a dumbass cowboy hat, who basically spoke for every farmer.
Well,
right?
and Paul Martin Sr.
Paul Martin Sr. and Chubby Power and Louis Saint Laurent when he was Justice Minister, who had this heavy career.
Past the Tequila Sheila.
Even her.
She was a great minister.
Great minister. And she owned Hamilton, and she didn't just bring herself to Parliament. She brought 4 other Liberals around her.
Yep.
Even when the Liberals,
John Crosby,
or Hazen Argue, or who was basically an NDP in Pierre Trudeau's cabinet, who was head of the wheat board. They had to put him in the Senate because the guy couldn't possibly win a seat. But he was the voice of the wheat farmer in cabinet. And Jim Richardson, who owned Richardson Securities, but was the richest man in Winnipeg, and also had this grain dealing business, and he understood what was going on. And Justin Trudeau's father-in-law, what was his name? Fraser or something. He was a fisheries minister. Yeah. But these people were characters in their own right. They weren't managed to death. They weren't snooped on by their chiefs of staff and ratted on by their comms people and handed lines. They were just throwing that stuff back and said, I'm elected by my people out there, and I deliver to you, a chunk of Saskatchewan or.
Well, do you remember during the cod crisis? John Crosby was a national hero. I mean, he stood up saying, "These are my people are starving," and that was. And I was an Ontario boy going, listen to him. He knows what he's all about.
Brian Tobin.
Yeah.
When
He was a Captain Canada before my father was.
Yeah, when they were fighting over the fisheries on the nose of the Grand Bank, and he, where would a guy like that be now? I can't tell you who the fisheries minister is, and actually I know that there are all kinds of fisheries, important fisheries problems in Canada in the Great Lakes, because Trump has cut the people who look after the lamprey control. There's a real worry that they're going to let these evil carp get through from the Chicago River into the Great Lakes. Any fishery ministers speaking about that? The Elvers thing with the eels.
Some of the NDP MPs that lost in this election were some of the best on committee in the whole government. It's quite a loss. Some of these guys who
and one of the problems committees have
like
had,
I know you don't like Charlie Angus, but Charlie Angus in committee was solid.
Yeah, and committees used to get good coverage. Charlie's coming back. He's running for leader of the NDP. He's been running for that since before the election.
Oh.
So don't worry.
I thought he was on tour with Grievous Angels again.
No, God,
not going back to music then.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. I'm not sure he was going to run, but he's been out banging the gong for Canadian nationalism since before the election.
Yes.
But that's beside the point. You're right about the committees. It's where stuff gets done. They used to be covered by Canadian press when they had a much bigger bureau.
Yeah.
And so these guys would get in the paper, and women would get in the paper for the work they did. And now they do this work, and it's completely unsung.
Huh.
And a lot of it is just for the sake of the people of Canada. Like literally is because you can have somebody who's great in committee, and their constituents will never know. Yeah. And that's a shame, because when I first came to the Hill, I was so impressed by the committee.
Well, at least Michelle Ferreri lost. She was one of the worst. She was, Canada's Marjorie Taylor Greene in committee. She was awful.
Yeah. I disrupt her, right?
Yes.
But I found that an awful lot with the Charlie Angus types and stuff at different levels of government, where they're basically shit disturbers in council or whatever, and then you get behind closed doors in committee, and they've done their homework and they're asking questions. I wasn't impressed with him on the weed committee stuff, but I also know how hard he fought for the school in Attawapiskat in his riding.
He was a good riding guy, I understand.
Pretty good riding guy. His problem was that they redistributed his riding.
Yeah, right.
And he did the math and said, I don't think I'm going to win this. And if I'm going to run for leader, I'm not going to run for leader after I've lost my seat. So he decided to give up the seat rather than lose it, and then run for leader anyway.
Well, we should wrap this episode. I'm going to throw for a second and see if there's anything we want to talk about before we go. But I just want to throw a question to you. Who do you think is going to be the next speaker? Do you think Greg Fergus will win it again?
I hope he wins it. I just like the guy so much. Elizabeth May's been fishing for it. I don't think she should have it. I don't see.
Traditionally, you give it to your own party.
Yeah, but when it's close, but then, in a way, you could force somebody in another party to vote for you, because when there's a tie vote, the speaker must vote on behalf of the government, in favor of the government. We saw that when Paul Martin was prime minister a couple times. But I don't see any reason why Greg Fergus should not be reelected. Peter Milliken was reelected.
I asked him on election night, and he said, I may run. He was being very cagey.
Well, of course, yeah. He may not, but I don't.
It's not good politics to say you're going to run.
I'm not going to run. I'm going to crush them. I'm going to grind their bones. He's also he also belonged in cabinet.
Yes.
It's a tricky thing for speakers to have a political career after being speaker, though Andrew Scheer just ignored that.
Yeah.
But most of the time, speakers hive off onto respectable new worlds, like being governor general or whatever. I don't see why Fergus shouldn't stay, and or who's sort of the person you'd think would be any better. Mm-hmm. And if Poilievre's people, they would criticize Fergus just like they criticized everybody else. I wouldn't take that.
That was really why I was asking. How much do you think the Conservatives will oppose it?
To Fergus, and I call him Greg now because I have talked to him, is I would really, really like to see some speaker whip that house into shape. It would take consensus, at least among the majority of members, but it's become a joke. The whole question period thing has become such a joke. And it's a joke almost at the level of, where's that parliament? Is it Korea? Taiwanese
They
parliament.
keep having the fist fights.
Yeah, we don't have the fist fights, but we just have these stupid, childish outbursts.
Poilievre is one of the worst offenders. I mean, he's constantly pushing the speaker by rising before the prime minister is finished, and the speaker's only admonition is to say, "You will wait your turn." Otherwise, he's going to be thrown out again, and he doesn't want to throw him out.
And the heckling, the shouting,
No, I think the heckling. What's the argument against having the cameras on the hecklers? I mean, it's a house rule, right?
I know.
The camera can
I
only.
think they could name and shame them. One of the things about the heckling is sometimes it's so bad you can't that the actual video is not usable on the news, right?
Yeah, that's true.
And there's stuff that's done to break people's answers, and Scheer used to do that. Rise as a speaker when somebody's giving a good answer, and they'd be cut off, and now you have an unusable clip, right? If there's going to be a question period, the questions should be answered. I think that as MPs have every right to have their questions answered. If they're not going to be answered, they're where. The ones on the order paper are answered responsibly. I don't know why they can't be answered, but then the questions themselves have to be, like substantial good faith questions. And there's been more of a move to just have the prime minister not there very often, twice a week or something, which I think is, which is the British system, by the way. I think prime minister shows up once a week.
Yes, that's right. Wednesdays, I think. Right?
Yeah, and that's not, maybe in the UK where the government governs a country with twice as many people, but
and they don't have desks.
Yeah, they don't have desks.
Where would Jimmy the K keep his cheese tray?
They just have a wool sack for the guy who collects taxes. It's a very odd system. But they need. That is all people see of Parliament. Your typical Canadian, if they stumble onto the news, the videos they see of Parliament are of people just acting like assholes. And so they say, well, Parliament's just a bunch of assholes.
They also see a lot of ribbon cutting.
Well, yeah, but I'm talking about Parliament, right? Like when they see, like they know that there's billions and billions of dollars spent on Parliament Hill, and there's all these MPs and ministers and everything. But when they see them, they're acting like assholes in Parliament. Yeah. And so the logical, and they don't see the empty house debating the bills where there's, it's often not even a quorum, but they don't call quorum anyway. So you've got like 343 MPs, is it? And there'll be like 20 in the whole house debating a bill that will affect all kinds of people. Yeah. And the committee work. They don't see the committee work where they really do the actual work. To hopefully they do the actual work, and they don't see any of the stuff in the Senate, which also does very conscientious work, but is mocked because none of the journalists actually bother to find out what they're doing. So they just say, well, they just look at the way they're appointed and say they're just a bunch of freeloaders. They don't realize that once they're appointed, these people have unlimited freedom until they're 75 to do whatever they want. Yep. It's
introduced legislation.
Yes, it's so unencumbering, right? And they do, and they take it seriously, and they want to be able to look people in the eye and say, "I earned my money." I'm not saying all of them. There's been some real dicks, to coin a phrase, but I know several senators personally, and I know how hard they work. And even Mike Duffy, when he was a senator, he had a constituency office in PEI and showed up to events. I never had a senator show up to events when I was a kid. Anyway, that doesn't get told to people. They just see question period. So if your store window is a clown show and people are walking by, then they'll think this place is full of clowns. So I gotta fix that. I'm
just enjoying that metaphor. That's quite good.
Well,
store window
really
full of clowns. And on that note,
okay,
shall we wrap it up?
Sure, let's wrap it up.
All right, thanks for joining us for episode 4 of History Echoes podcast. I'm Mick Gzowski. This is Mark Bourrie. Until next time.
Mm-hmm.